Start. Good. You got
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
We're good.
All right,
Uh,
Evan. Thank you for joining me. I'm just gonna do a brief intro, and then we'll start a few questions, and you can tell me about your experience and whatever
all right.
comes up. Really,
All right.
doesn't
That sounds great.
have to go in any particular direction. Let's just um, play it by ear. So
Okay.
anyway, let's go. I've got it written down here somewhere. So today I have the privilege of hosting a distinguished guest who brings a unique perspective shaped by his remarkable journey. My guest today is a neurosurgeon who dedicated most of his life to his professional career, I should say, to the field of medicine, and was interestingly also an atheist up until a pivotal turning point in 2008. During this year, he was afflicted with a severe case of meningitis. He found himself in a profound health struggle, which eventually plunged him into a coma and almost death. This harrowing experience, however, proved to be a blessing and also transformative, changing his career path and spiritual beliefs. Inspired by his near death encounter, my guest found himself compelled to share his newfound insights with the world. He has become an accomplished author, authoring the books Proof of Heaven, Map of Heaven, and Living in a Mindful Universe. These works reflect what happened during his brush with death and his reevaluation of how the universe works. So, Evan, thank you for joining me. Why don't you start with what actually happened when you got sick and what meningitis actually does to your brain?
Okay, Nick. Well, thanks for having me on. It's great to be with you today. Important to point out that when all this happened back in 2008, I was a 54-year-old neurosurgeon, had spent more than 15 years teaching at Harvard Medical School, thought I had some understanding of the brain-mind connection and the nature of consciousness. And that was to undergo major revision during this week of coma. It turns out that the kind of meningitis I had in many ways is a perfect model for human death. And that is confirmed not just in my medical details reported in the book Proof of Heaven, but also in a medical case report that appeared in the peer-reviewed Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases back in September 2018. Case report by Dr. Surbi Khanna, Lauren Moore, and Bruce Grayson, physicians not involved in my care, but fascinated by my recovery. And they made 2 points that basically validated and strengthened points that I had made in Proof of Heaven. But with their objective view, it's much stronger. The first important statement was based on my neurologic exams, Glasgow coma scales, CT and MRI scans showing that all of my brain was affected. There was no place left to harbor any kind of dream or hallucination. The data was very clear that I should have been incapable of any kind of dream or hallucination other than the most rudimentary of conscious experiences due to the widespread damage to my neocortex. And yet, during that week in coma, I had the most profound, detailed, memorable, alive, meaningful, and rich experiences of my entire existence. How did that happen?
Yeah,
When
exactly.
the brain was being taken offline, that I had this extraordinary experience. That's the first major point the case report makes. But the second one, which is probably even more of a kind of a challenge to people who try and explain this away, is my recovery. When they submitted the case report, the peer review editors said, well, wait a minute, this is absurd. Nobody's this sick from meningoencephalitis that then makes a full recovery. How do you explain it? And the 3 doctors who wrote the case report said it's because he had a near-death experience. That's why he was able to muster this incredible recovery. And the scientific peer review editor said, okay, that explains it. And they published it. And that, I think, is a very crucial factor here because often in NDEs, you find these miraculous healings that are inexplicable by modern medicine.
Yes.
Now, taking you deep into the journey itself, what happened during that week in coma? Well, important to state up front that an unusual feature of my near-death experience was amnesia. I had no memories of Eben Alexander's life, of Earth, humanity. It really was an empty slate. And I only realized in the months and years after recovering, after coming out of coma, why that was so important, that amnesia. And it basically prevented me from dismissing the whole experience is a vast hallucination. And that was a very important step. Now, given that background of amnesia, here goes what I witnessed. It started in this, what I call the earthworm eye view, very primitive, coarse, unresponsive realm. It was like being in dirty jello. I had kind of memories of things going on around me. At no point did I have any body awareness during this entire journey, but I was a speck of awareness kind of monitoring the things going on around me. And in that setting, in this earthworm eye view, it was very kind of foreboding, like being in a underground, surrounded by roots, blood vessels, something like that. I had tactile kind of sensations. And it seemed to go for a very long time. I'm sure my memory of moment to moment was not really existent. And so it seemed to go for ages. And yet I was rescued from that by this slowly spinning white light. Came packaged with a perfect musical melody. That's very important because the notes of that melody I had to remember much later to help me conjure up these portals, because I had tumbled down from the highest spiritual levels into that gateway valley. And by remembering the notes of the melody, that's what allowed me to traverse these various spiritual levels several times. That first passage was like through a light portal up into this brilliant, ultra real gateway valley, as I call it, and it was had many Earth-like features, but also richly spiritual. The Earth-like features, I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing. There were millions of other butterflies looping and spiraling in vast formations. We were above this meadow surrounded by forest. There were sparkling waterfalls into these crystal blue pools. And in this beautiful meadow, it was rich with life. There was no sign of any death or decay at any point. It was, in many ways, I compare it to Plato's world of ideals, but for the individual soul. And that Gateway Valley, that's where we would reunite with the higher soul. That's where we reunite with souls of departed loved ones. That's where, with our soul group, that's where we would go through life reviews. Life review, very important to point out to people who don't know, they've been described in NDEs going back thousands of years, and they are basically more real than experiences from the material realm. Very important. And not only that, but important to point out is you can witness in that life review birth, death, everything in between, previous lives, future lives, etc. Every bit of that is available. So you're in a realm that's very different from this realm. This is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to explain to people and put into words. I mean, where your whole life can be simultaneously presented to you in ways that you can interact with it. And what you find out when you study these cases in detail is that those memories are not, they're like a reliving, not a remembering of events. That's an important point.
Did you have a review personally?
Well, what happened was, given my amnesia, I could not have an Eben Alexander life review, but I did witness. Now I'm getting to that in the story, so let me get to it naturally.
Sure.
In this Gateway Valley, I was a speck of awareness on that butterfly wing. I wasn't alone there. There was a beautiful young woman. I'll never forget her. Sparkling blue eyes, high forehead, high cheekbones, soft brown hair, framing her lovely face. She was dressed in the same kind of simple but colorful garb as thousands of beings in the meadow down below us, dancing, joy and merriment, children playing, dogs jumping, all that kind of festivity. And it was all being fueled because up above were these swooping orbs of angelic choirs. And they were emanating chants, anthems, hymns that would thunder through my awareness, this incredible sense of being in this ocean of love and connection. And that is really the dominant theme, is that love and that kind of perfection of this world. Because we're all together in that world. And this, in fact, in NDEs, we realize we're all basically sharing one mind. And so in that beautiful setting, I had this message from this beautiful woman. She never spoke a word. She didn't have to. We had this kind of perfect mind meld of telepathic emotional connection. And her message to me, I think, was the central message I was to bring back to the world. You are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You are richly cared for. And I think To me, it was incredibly refreshing and reassuring. That was at a time when I was really beginning to feel that this was truly a spiritual home. As much as what I described may sound foreign to people, there were thousands of people who contacted me after reading Proof of Heaven, saying that it reminded them of their own experience, that it kind of a shared commonality. And it's it's not the butterflies or these kind of material details, but it's the kind of the scale and scope of what you're going through. So what then happened is the soft summer breeze that blew through. That was my first awareness of that divine, infinitely loving God for us. That's what so many NDEers have witnessed, and they come back to this world and they realize there's nothing to fear about death. It's not an extinction of consciousness. In fact, it's an expansion of consciousness beyond the very limited form that we have in these bodies. Now, what happened, the angelic choirs provided yet another portal. And I remember seeing all of four-dimensional space-time collapsing down. All of this rich spiritual realm that includes, simultaneity of an entire life and lifetimes, that kind of thing, that what I call deep time or meta time, to even begin to explain causality, because that realm is not at all locked into the flow of Earth time. That's a very important point for deeper discussion about resolving paradoxes and these kinds of issues, especially about reincarnation and about loved ones being there, when we pass over, is our loved one going to be there, et cetera. So then what happened, the angelic choirs provided this light portal to higher and higher levels, as I saw all of that collapsing down until the entire universe throughout all of eternity was this complex oversphere that was there for instruction. And it was in that setting that I was taught so many of the lessons. And that includes visions I had that showed me the absolute, unquestionable reality, not only the afterlife, but of reincarnation, that our souls come back again and again, but there's a process to program forgetting. So that, at least in our culture, by age 6 or 7, a child who's had such memories no longer remembers them in most cases. The scientists who have studied that kind of thing make a big note, get these memories before age 6 or 7, because most of us by our later, 10, teen years don't have such memories. So as I ascended to this higher level, what I saw was 2 visions that showed me reincarnation, showed me life reviews, showed me every bit of that. The first was a fairly simple one, the flying fish vision. And it's just like it sounds. We were, as flying fish down in the water, we're down these material bodies. We're temporarily dumbed down. We don't have the memory and knowledge of higher soul. But this is where we actually do all the growing, is in our interactions down in this world, in the material realm. And then, of course, the fish fly up out of the water. That's at the time of bodily death, reuniting with higher soul, departed loved ones, making agreements for the next challenges of the next lifetime with the soul group, and then diving back in. The second vision, on a separate passage through the core, was far more powerful. It's what I call the Indra's net vision. And in that vision, I basically saw this multi-dimensional, both temporal and spatial dimensions, duplicated in many ways in this Indra's net. And it was a network that really showed how we can see the impact of our choices and actions, thoughts in this world reflected across time and space for their huge impact on the world at large. And this is where we realize that our choices are very important and that we're given the gift of free will. And we have the choice to either act out of love, compassion, kindness, and mercy for all of our fellow beings and for ourselves. This is the most direct ascent towards that oneness with the divine. But we have the free will option to choose otherwise, to be selfish or greedy, hand out pain and suffering to others. But if we do those things, we must remember that in the life review, we become the receiver of whatever we've dished out to others. That's why the life review is such a beautiful course correction that gently nudges all of sentience towards this notion of loving connection and oneness. And that vision, that Indra's net vision, was absolutely stunning. And to me, it suggested a reason for our very existence is working towards that oneness with the divine through this acknowledgement and recognition that we're all truly in this together. We're sharing the one mind, and that love is that binding force. And so the essential message of NDEs is really one of love and connection and kindness and taking care of each other. That's it. That is the message.
Yeah.
And that's the big challenge to humanity, is to fully absorb that lesson. It's a lesson that the universe has been trying to teach us for at least 5,000 years now. And religions have taken, a poke at it, trying to get it right. But unfortunately, in duplicating the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated, which is what the life review shows us.
Yeah.
And many religions try and duplicate that, but they tend to become ideologies and control people, et cetera. So religions, even though they might be a great source of spirituality for people, unfortunately, the ideologies do not necessarily allow that.
Yeah.
And they can be very competitive with each other. And then all the love and kindness, compassion, and mercy is thrown out the window.
Yeah.
So this is where we really need to focus, is on that deep lesson of NDEs. Anyway, getting back to my story very quickly to finish so we can get on your questions. Every time I entered the Corps, I was told, you're not here to stay. You'll be going back, teach you many things. And that did happen in multiple passages. As I've said, by remembering the musical notes, I would always land at that earth where my view and could conjure up that light portal back into the Gateway Valley. But then there came a time when, as they told me, you're not here to stay, was true. And using the musical notes in my mind, I could no longer conjure up that light portal that took me up to the Gateway Valley. To say I was sad at that point would be an understatement, but I also knew by then I could trust, I would be taken care of, and I had nothing to fear. What I witnessed after that was thousands of beings all around me going off into the mists. They were many kneeling, some standing, heads bowed, some holding candles. And this murmuring energy coming from them. They were saying something, but I couldn't understand the words. My amnesia for language was still very active. But I felt the power of their message, and it was one of love. And what I called that when I came back to this world and I was writing it all up weeks later, I said that was the power of prayer that I was witnessing with that incredible vision. And then the last thing of the journey were the 6 faces I saw that would bubble up out of the muck. They'd say a few words and then disappear. Now, my amnesia still prevented me from understanding the words. And I can remember the faces as clearly today as if the whole thing happened yesterday morning. Those faces were right there. But at the time I saw them, I didn't recognize them. Again, my amnesia. But it turns out that it was a few hours later, I started coming back to this world, and I was fighting the ventilator. They pulled out the tube. I said, thank you. I don't remember that early wake up. My youngest sister, Phyllis, told me I was sitting on the bed. It was the most amazing thing that I would look at everyone around me, family and friends, nurses, physicians, and I would say, all is well. Don't worry. All is well. And she said it was astonishing because there was this guy who doctors had predicted was going to die. I'd gone from a 10% chance of survival down to 2% over that week, with no chance of recovery by the end of the week. On that ventilator on 3 powerful intravenous antibiotics without showing positive signs of any kind of neurologic improvement. And that's when I started coming back to this world. But my brain was still in big trouble from the meningitis.
Yeah.
And in fact, over the next 36 hours, I was in and out of a paranoid, delusional, psychotic nightmare. All this is described in the book Proof of Heaven, and in many of the stories I've told online about it.
Yeah.
But the reality is the memories from the deep coma experience, that rich spiritual journey, those memories are as sharp today as if the whole thing happened today. Whereas the memories of that 36 hours in and out of being present in the ICU versus being kind of psychotic, I don't remember that at all. I'm glad I wrote it down, because those memories lasted for a few weeks and then they seemed to dissipate. But very different for me as a neurosurgeon, neuroscientist, to get that those memories from my life before coma came back so readily over 2 months after recovering. We talk about it in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, how memories are not even stored in the brain. And that is such a giant nail in the coffin of materials neuroscience that we don't discuss it a lot. But neurosurgeons have noted that, over more than a century of major brain resections, there's never been a case of long-term memories being removed with a brain operation. So memories are not stored in the brain. It's one of the best and most powerful arguments that, we're much more than just our physical body, and our mental awareness and our psyche is what allows us to really discover our connection with the universe in large measure. I've spent the 15 years since my coma trying to make sense of all this as a scientist.
Yeah.
And that's where, of course, our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, I think is so important because it goes well beyond proof of heaven in actually being a proof of heaven. And this is where the science comes together, quantum physics, neuroscience, philosophy of mind, parapsychology, all the evidence for non-local consciousness. Every bit of that is covered in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, in an effort to truly kind of paint the picture that modern science is fully accepting in the next decade or so. And that is one of the primacy of consciousness, where the brain is a filter, reducing valve, but it's certainly not the primary producer of your conscious awareness. There's far too much evidence that consciousness is much bigger than that. And that is exactly where the science of consciousness is headed now. And I work with scientists around the world to try and better evolve these models of understanding.
Yeah, so I mean, there's so much there that I just had so many questions pop into my head, and yeah, I've forgotten most of them. But just to follow up with what you just finished on there and your discussion on consciousness, like, will we as humans, with our limited number of words and the restrictions language has, ever be able to truly understand or define what consciousness is? And is consciousness, because when I started my spiritual awakening started, I often got confused as to what consciousness is. Like, is it another word for God, spirit, soul?
I would say keep it very simple and just say consciousness is awareness of existing. What it's like to be Eben Alexander, what it's like to be, any one of us. And that is consciousness. It's just that awareness. Now, the interesting thing is the model most of us were taught and kind of the modern scientific and philosophical understanding is of materialism or physicalism. That is the notion that only the physical world exists. And if that were true, then you'd have to fully explain consciousness as an emergent property of the brain itself. But all the evidence points to the fact that is not the case. As quantum physicists were discerning back in the 1920s and 30s, and the leading founders of the field, like Erwin Schrödinger and Wolfgang Pauli and Max Planck and Pascual Jordan, Eugene Wigner, John von Neumann, all of these people made statements about how you could not get around consciousness. It seemed to be fundamental and primary in the universe, not some emergent property of the physical brain and things like that. And of course, many physicists kind of ignored that and pretended that it was all still a cold mechanistic system without any kind of evidence of free will. And yet the investigation, as we delineate very completely in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, through the decades of examining quantum physics and coming to a deeper understanding of it, has put us in a position where it's undeniable that the primacy of consciousness is a fundamental feature of what quantum physics is telling us about. And we all share this one mind. And in fact, NDEs show that sharing beautifully. For example, when you read Anita Moorjani's beautiful story, that she wrote the book Dying to Be Me, she is aware deep in her NDE that was in the case of coma, in the setting of advanced lymphoma, being within hours of death. In that kind of setting, she had this beautiful experience where her mental space overlapped with her brother, who is still alive, who is actively flying from India to Hong Kong, potentially for her funeral. And she mind melded with him. So she knew what he was up to. She also mind melded with her father, who had passed over, who had already crossed over. So the important thing to point out here is that in that mental space, just because a body has died does not mean that soul is not accessible. This is a very important kind of distinction and part of what is emerging in the science of consciousness, to simply accept these facts, these empirical facts, and not just run away and sweep them under the rug because they don't fit our materialist physicalist model, because in fact there are models emerging that allow us to make sense of this and realize, there are hyperdimensional models like Bernard Carr, a physicist in England who worked with Stephen Hawking. Bernard Carr has come up with some excellent models of higher dimensional space and time that would easily help us understand these kind of situations much more readily. Other quantum physicists have written about this issue of consciousness, like Roger Penrose. He's been deeply involved in this since at least 1989 when he wrote Mystery of the Mind. And it really has come a long way. And the problem is, so far we've asked specialists to give us the answers, experts. And the problem is consciousness is universal. It's the thing we experience. We don't experience some naked reality of a physical world. That's what quantum physics teaches us very deeply, is there's not an objective physical world out there independent of the observing mind. John Wheeler, the famous Princeton physicist, developed the participatory anthropic principle to try and make sense of this, that the examining mind plays a deep role in what emerges as our reality. And the more we realize that everything in this physical reality emerges from the mental space of information, that's where we start to realize the kind of power we actually have over this world. Because materialist science would scoff at you for claiming you have free will, because to them, it's all chemical reactions, electron fluxes in the brain, all that atomic and subatomic and molecular material just following the rules of physics, chemistry, biology. So how in the world could you inject free will into that situation? And the reason free will is so alive and well is because that's an improper way to look at it. We really need to look at this model where mind is what is generating everything that we witness in the physical realm. And the power of mind over matter is an essential kind of conclusion from all this. And this is where, as a healer, I'm fascinated by it. You know, as a neurosurgeon, I realize placebo effect is just the beginning. Placebo effect, 7 decades worth of medical science, recognizing that thoughts, beliefs, and attitudes can play a tremendous role in our healing. And then you move beyond that into spontaneous remission of cancers and infections. And studies have been done showing people healing far beyond the effects of medical intervention, and healing what were previously thought to be kind of incurable diseases. And then we move into miraculous healing and near-death experiences, like Anita Moorjani's case that I mentioned. Her lymphoma disappeared when she came back to this world. Or Dr. Mary C. Neal, she wrote the book To Heaven and Back, orthopedic surgeon, kayaking accident in Chile in late 1990s, over 30-minute warm water drowning. Ask any doctor, what is somebody's brain like after over 30-minute warm water drowning? They say the brain is turning to mush. Well, they brought her to the surface dead. They resuscitated her. She ended up making a complete recovery, going back to orthopedic surgery, but also going around the world. And I presented with her about near-death experiences. Her story is a beautiful example of the kind of healing that comes from a spiritual encounter like an NDE. And it shows us the power we have as spiritual beings to influence our unfolding reality. And that especially begins with our health and wholeness and healing.
Yeah, exactly right. So, do you think one day we will get to the point we won't need any drugs or medication to heal each other? We can just have that spiritual connection, which takes care of everything.
Well, I think we will get to a point where we are much more kind of able to manifest health and wholeness because of our spiritual awareness of our kind of life mission and where we're headed, and to take care of ourselves. You know, one of the problems, I remember Raymond Moody, who wrote that book, Life After Life, back in 1975, kicked off this whole kind of near-death experience revolution. I remember he told me a few years ago that everybody he knows is basically committing slow suicide. People drinking, people smoking, people doing risky behaviors, you know, just all over the place. People are not taking care of themselves. And so part of the lesson is that we can do a much better job of kind of taking care of ourselves. And I've come to realize that any kind of physical, mental, or emotional health or wholeness or healing must originate in spiritual wholeness and healing. And when I say spiritual, it doesn't have to be religious at all, even though religions can be useful at enhancing one's spirituality. But sadly, in our modern world, religions, you know, in the last few centuries or millennia, religions sometimes have been conflicting, and they've fallen away from the message of the prophets that was their origin, away from notions of love, kindness, compassion, and fallen into you know, ideologies that are very contrary to what we were originally taught by the prophets about taking care of each other in love and kindness. And that this is where it's important that the science of today, the science we point out in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, which is not woo-woo, this is actually quantum-informed science of consciousness. And it takes neuroscience and philosophy of mind, and it takes parapsychology and telepathy and all the evidence for non-local consciousness, distance healing, prayer, mind over matter, all of these things combined with quantum physics, and voila, we start coming up with a way to understand how all of this could be true in a scientifically valid setting. And what you have to realize is that science, quantum informed science of consciousness, is no longer constricted by the bleak and paltry fiction that corralled materialism or physicalism for all these years, to the point where physicalist or materialist scientists would try and pretend any of these experiences don't exist, that an NDE is just made up hallucination. And they're really missing, an incredible amount of data to help them understand what's going on. You cannot interpret quantum physics without deeply going into the brain-mind connection and really digging deep to find about the nature of reality, of what it is around us. And it turns out it's far richer than just this simplistic materialist notion that science has led us to so far. But the good news is there are hundreds of scientists around the world working on this problem who have advanced far beyond that materialist or physicalist nonsense. And for example, you can go to scientificandmedical.net. You can go to GalileoCommission.org. Those are two sites that have a tremendous amount of information of this revolution that I'm talking about. I'm on the scientific advisory board for those groups, and there are literally hundreds of scientists around the world who are working on this deep question. But the reality is the empirical data that shows afterlife and reincarnation, that is there. It's solid as a rock. Most of us don't remember past lives because of program forgetting. As Jim Tucker and Ian Stevenson at University of Virginia. You can go to uvadops.org. That's a division of perceptual studies.
So what is program forgetting exactly?
Program forgetting, it is basically it's a process we see where you can experience things in the spiritual realm, and yet coming back to this world, some of those memories do not come back with you. So it's like there's a gatekeeper, your higher soul, that allows certain knowledge to come back, some not. And then, of course, when in a very practical sense, you encounter program forgetting, if you go to uvadops.org, the Division of Perceptual Studies, they've in the last 6 decades studied over 2,700 cases of children remembering past lives. And as they'll tell you, you must harvest those memories before age 6 or 7, because after that age, most of these children start losing those memories. So you've got to get them early. And most of us, as teenagers and adults, we don't have those past life memories unless we do hypnotic regression, unless we have an NDE and that brings back these past memories, unless we do meditation, actively seeking past life memories. There are certainly ways to uncover them. But for most of us, they don't exist. So we blindly go through life, temporarily dumbed down due to this program forgetting, but that gives us skin in the game. That, I think, is why that is so important. We have this buy-in to this life that we're living, because this is where we actually get most of the work done. It's not in that material, in the spiritual realm. That I look at it as breathing, inhale, exhale. And this life where we're living and learning the lessons is the inhale. And that's done with that program forgetting, so that only certain parts of that knowledge are allowed. And I think that each time we come back, more and more of that comes through. So our souls can advance through this process. And that's where this notion of reincarnation is quite different, for example, from, say, a Buddhist interpretation where it's, try to get off the wheel of suffering. And your goal is to exit, where I would say that the reincarnation that is talked about in this NDE setting is really one of grace. It's one of progression, of transformation, evolution of consciousness. From my point of view, it's very much along the lines of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who wrote the book Phenomenon of Man in the mid-20th century. And he was a French Jesuit priest and a paleontologist, so he was very spiritual. He was also very scientific and thought on billion-year timescales. And he realized evolution was happening, just like they were discussing about Darwin, but it was much bigger. In his view, it was an evolution of all consciousness. And I think he was right on the money. I think that's exactly what we're in the process of doing. And this evolution is something we all participate in as humanity advances. And it's about an evolution of all sentience throughout the cosmos.
So do you think the soul makes an actual choice to come here and choose the life, like the parents you have, the country you live in, and does it have any say in certain things that happen in your life? Like, for instance, your story of a neurosurgeon getting a brain-eating meningitis. It's so almost, like someone's written this story. It's almost like it was
Right.
planned before you came. It's what do you think?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you're kind of bringing up the whole notion of synchronicities,
Mm,
synchronicities that were defined by the Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung back in the mid 20th century. And they're basically a recognition that events that we see in our lives that seem to be related and yet have no kind of causal chain of relationship through the material realm can have great meaning and power in teaching us. And I think that's exactly what is going on. And I would say I've come to realize that this whole notion of soul agreements that I first learned about by reading Stan Grof and Michael Newton, Brian Weiss, Robert Schwartz, and others. I think there's a lot to it. And I would say that basically that our soul groups plan incarnations that involve a lot of hardships, which are learning, teaching point potentials that occur in our lives. For me, some of those challenges were like at age 11 days, I was put up for adoption. My birth mother was 16 years old, unwed. All that story is told in Proof of Heaven. It has a giant amount to do with my overall story and my NDE in particular, because I'd spent much of my life with this kind of subconscious question as to whether or not I was worthy of love. And that was something that was answered very strongly in the affirmative during my NDE. But it was that lifelong struggle with that I think was important for me. So in other words, the adoption, age 11 days, although she wouldn't let me go, she wouldn't sign the papers, but social services had already taken me away for failure to thrive, and I'd been hospitalized. But because she wouldn't sign the papers to let me go, I was stuck in a baby dormitory for 4 months. And that was kind of the beginning of my life. Now, I was adopted into a wonderful, loving family. I couldn't have been more fortunate. So I'm not looking for any kind of pity. But the reality is, there was that deep wound that adopted kids have, orphans have. And that's what I lived with. And that was part of a driving force that to me was very important. I'm grateful for that wound because that helped me to grow. Likewise, I struggle with alcohol. Early in my career, I never had any trouble with alcohol at work, but on my nights off, I leaned a little too heavily on a tall scotch. I knew it was a problem. And with family help, I ended up stopping all that very early in my career back in 1991. Very grateful for that. What I'm grateful for is that I was born alcoholic. That is what gave me the beautiful gift of lessons to learn and grow through that hardship. Meningitis was the same thing. People say, oh my gosh, that's terrible. You had this horrible meningitis. Well, it's one of the greatest gifts of my life. Now, you might say, well, look where you are now. You recovered, this miraculous recovery. But yeah, look at the lessons I got from that miraculous recovery. Incredible lessons to share with the world. So, those hardships were really, in many ways, the defining moments of my life. It's how we respond to the hardships. Are we able to harvest this sense of love and connection with the universe, sense of meaning and purpose with others? Can we put all that together into our life story that assimilates and embraces the hardships and challenges as opportunities for growth and learning? That is where these kind of stories, this kind of experience can be so powerful at helping people to grow into their own mission in life and come into their own sense of connection with the universe, what it's all about. Love, kindness, compassion, acceptance, mercy, when necessary, forgiveness. These are the principles in human existence that can lead us towards a spiritual growth. And they're kind of contrary in many ways to what our materialist, ego toxic, ego besotted society is struggling with now, because materialism gives you that false sense of separation. It's a false sense of competition with others, kind of this fear mongering and sense of lack of abundance. And we realize that is not consistent with a quantum informed unity of consciousness, one mind, which is really where the science of all this is headed. As we explore in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, as Larry Dossey did in his book, One Mind, as Bernardo Kastrup did in his paper on the universe in consciousness in Journal of Consciousness Studies back in 2018, and also Steve Taylor's book, Spiritual Science. These are four great resources for understanding the oneness of mind, how the brain is a filter, it's a transceiver, but it's not ultimately the source of conscious awareness. And this is where the science gets very exciting. And also individuals who are excited about this kind of discussion can realize that the science fully supports this beautiful vision of our emergent free will. And the philosophical position goes beyond just idealism, which was what we defended so strongly in Living in a Mindful Universe. But when you really hear what we're talking about, evolutionary panentheism would be a much better philosophical description of the position, acknowledging this God force that, of course, 90% plus of NDEers going back thousands of years come back believing in some unifying force of love at the core of the universe, whether you want to call it God, Allah, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh, Great Spirit. You know, you can pretend that you can label it and own it, but there is no such thing. Because we are ultimately, our conscious awareness is sourced in that infinitely loving God force. And it goes beyond any kind of human depictions and attempts at corralling it and defining it. But it's really all about that connection and the love of the creator for the creation when you realize we are co-creating with that force of love our emergent reality.
Yeah, going back to what you're saying about suffering, it's so true, isn't it? Because people, myself included, are always complaining about life being so hard and why it's so challenging and why is there so much darkness in this place. And yeah, you can let that drag you down. And like you say, the materialistic ego side of ourselves is always trying to figure that out. But you can look at it from a spiritual point of view. It is kind of a teacher, and it is pushing you, because without that hardness to life, you would be, just cruising along and not forced to make any changes. Whereas when you put out of your comfort zone and darkness pops up in your life, it forces you to travel in a new direction. So, but yeah,
Well,
I was wondering like what is the soul's purpose in being like does the soul do anything? Does it, help keep the body alive? Is it there just sit with the body and witness this experience? Like
I think it's the soul is there to witness and to grow and to teach, to learn and to teach, to participate with other souls in our soul group in this process of learning. And when I use the word soul group, I really mean very broadly. In fact, I came back realizing that many who I had seen in my life before as maybe a nemesis, someone who maybe was standing in the way of things that I wanted to achieve in life, what I came to realize that in many ways they were near and dear soulmates. That's why it's important to pray, pray for your enemy, as they say. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're here to, help each other grow. And people who I found difficult in my life often would reveal something about myself that needed some real work. And this is where I've become very grateful for people who I found to be a challenge in life. They often have contributed to my own growth and understanding. And I do find that over time, things seem to get easier and relationships seem to become much more harmonious, especially due to my meditation practice. I meditate an hour to a day. I've been doing that for more than 11 years now. I use sacred acoustics. People can go to sacredacoustics.com to learn more, but basically it's the most powerful form of binaural beat brainwave entrainment I have encountered. Full disclosure is one of the co-founders of Sacred Acoustics is my partner, Karen Newell, who is also the co-author of the book, Living in a Mindful Universe. In fact, I was the one who encouraged Karen and her business partner, Kevin Cossey, the audio engineer, to get together back in 2011 when I first met them, because I was beginning to meditate using these tones. I realized as a neuroscientist the differential frequency brainwave entrainment, which works by using sound to influence the lower brainstem. It's why it is so incredibly powerful. And if you read the testimonials at sacredacoustics.com, you'll see it's a very powerful tool indeed. In fact, it's been proven in a peer-reviewed scientific study to reduce anxiety very, very strongly. 26% reduction over 2 weeks of listening in a busy Manhattan, New York psychiatric practice, published by Dr. Anna Yusim in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease, a peer-reviewed journal. 26% reduction over 2 weeks versus only 7% reduction of anxiety in people who had standard talk therapy over those 2 weeks. So just listening to these tones can be incredibly powerful kind of modulator to bring some peace and harmony in your life, especially in this modern anxious time, polarized time of our world. It's great to have some relief from that. And people who are interested should try the free 20-minute file download from sacredacoustics.com, listen through headphones, look at some of her training videos at sacredacoustics.com. You'll learn a lot more about how to do this, but it's a powerful way of showing that our mind is really the mind of the universe. And we're really sharing that mind, and it does have tremendous power on what unfolds in our emerging reality.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. I'll check that out. What did you change about, like, you've obviously totally changed as a person after this experience. So did you change your diet or your TV viewing habits, or did you exercise more, drink less alcohol, or anything else change?
Yeah, well, basically a lot of it changed, if not all of it. My complete worldview flipped 180 degrees. I mean, once you realize we're all in this together as one kind of oversoul, as one spiritual entity in the process of growing, transforming, learning, and metamorphosing into something much greater. That's what we're up to. And that is kind of the effect I saw in my life. I did change my eating habits somewhat, certainly shifted much more to fish than I had previously. But anyway, just the way I view people, the way I interact with people, my sense of intuition, sense of empathy. I mean, all of these things can change dramatically after a near-death experience. And for me, the 15 years since then have been spent working with scientists around the world trying to come to a deeper understanding. And this is why I've given more than 700 interviews and written these books. And in fact, Karen and I are working on another book now. And I think will be very important. And the focus of that book is really going to be on the soul and the reality of the soul, that kind of thing. I think this world could learn a lot about, but it's a real gift because our modern world, if you get too sucked into everything going on in the material, physical world around us, especially with all the political polarization, the conflict, warfare, things like that, it can be very depressing. And yet I find I'm very optimistic about where the world is headed. But that optimism is absolutely rooted in believing that this awakening that I see so clearly is really coming to humanity. I believe it is. I say the scientific community is growing tremendously, that fully kind of engages and supports and dives into this, where we realize that materialism is a very bleak and paltry fiction that gives you that false sense of separation that is just not true. And it's especially important to learn this during your life. You don't want to just figure it all out on your deathbed when your loved ones do appear to you. You find out they're absolutely real, that the soul is real, your soul connections are real. And you realize then that as you leave the physical body, it's not the end of your awareness. But why find it all out then? Why not learn it much, much younger? I love giving talks to young audiences, kids in school, to try and help them get up to speed with this knowledge so they can live their whole life fully knowing the power of loving others, taking care of others, the beauty of kind of contributing to the overall highest and best good for all involved can be very healing and comforting. And in our ego besotted world, ego is at the root of addictions, at the root of fear of death, of cancer, things like that. And that ego is something that often needs to be sacrificed. And for me, it's been a beautiful journey in my meditative experience to let my ego voice make a statement, state a request, whatever at the beginning of meditation, but then the ego mind goes into timeout. And I've learned to ride those sacred acoustics tones and go very deep and traverse that kind of filtering or transceiving mechanism of the brain out into that primordial mind where we connect with a mental space of so many others. And that is where we can really start having an impact on this world. And it's by bringing that love that you find deep in meditation, that connecting force with the universe, that sense of meaning and purpose, bringing it back into this world and how we live our lives, all of our thoughts and actions concerning ourselves and others that can reflect this love and compassion and kindness for others. It's very healing at all levels.
Do you receive any messages or connection to the divine on your day-to-day journey? Or is that like, even when you're not meditating, is that something you experience on a regular basis? Or do you have to be
Well, I
in
do.
that state? Yeah.
I mean, I'm in a regular conversation with that God force of pure love. It's
Wow.
pretty much all gratitude. I can tell you it's just gratitude, gratitude, gratitude. Every breath, every little blessing in my life, you know, gratitude for the hardships, gratitude for my finding solutions, working through, growing from the hardships, et cetera. Every bit of it is gratitude. And that's completely different from a lot of what I may have harbored before my coma. And never forget, I think two of the most important concepts in human activities that can save us from so much misery are gratitude and forgiveness. And forgiveness liberates the forgiver. And it has nothing to do with any public expression of forgiveness. But what it has to do is in your own heart, forgiving the alleged perpetrator of any kind of evil against you. But that forgiveness is what frees you up. And it's a very important concept to get in there. But between gratitude and forgiveness, we can make a tremendous amount of headway.
On that note, Eben, I think we should wrap it up. I really appreciate your time, and you articulate all this so well, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, Nick, great talking with you too. And I would just encourage anybody who wants to reach out, go to ebenalexander.com. Also go to sacredacoustics.com for the meditation. And I highly suggest, if you want to engage with us in meaningful ways, there's several opportunities at innersanctumcenter.com. That's INNER sanctumcenter.com. At all levels, if you go there and check it out, you'll see what I mean. We did a lot of interviews during the pandemic with thought leaders around the world on consciousness. That interview series is there. We have a monthly webinar with many of our fans. That is right there at innersanctumcenter.com. These are ways you can keep in touch. And also Proof of Heaven, that book just came out with a 10th anniversary edition that has 36 additional pages in it that explain a lot of what's happened in the decades since it was first published.
Okay. Thank you so much, mate.
All right, Nick. Thanks a lot.
See you later. Bye.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.